Dawn leaks through the blinds as I prick the air with a spray of pale light and the faint scent of solvent. I'm standing on a ladder in a warehouse that pretends to be a studio, the floor slick with last night's spill and the walls still gloved in a memory of color. A bucket yawns at my feet, trembling with the thought of empty days to come, and I tell it to shut up with a careful sweep of my wrist. I learned long ago that empty days are not neutral. They're a weapon in disguise, aimed at your courage, and mine has learned to duck. People who know me say I've always followed an unconventional thread through life, but that's not quite right. It's not a thread so much as a stubborn wiggle of color in a world that wants me to line up, file, and sign my name on a predictable line. My dream began not with a spark, but with a stubborn echo I heard every Sunday when the church doors creaked and the family table groaned with the same dish: "You'll never make it." Art is a hobby, not a career. Get a real job. These words didn't sting once, they settled in the bones, and by the time I could read a shade chart, I'd already decided to color outside every map they handed me. I didn't tell them about my dreams at first. I kept quiet, letting the painting do the talking. The day I bought a tube of cerulean for $40 and painted a single unapologetic stroke across a chipped brick wall behind the town bus depot, I heard the quiet hum of change I hadn't expected. A bus driver, two teenagers with earbuds in their ears, a grandmother clutching a bag of groceries. People who never bothered to look twice suddenly stopped and looked again, as if a rumor had begun to pass through the air. If I squinted, it seemed like the color itself leaned toward them and whispered, "You don't know beauty until you've stood still to notice it." The mocking came, of course. It always comes first as a cough in the throat of a family member who has learned to measure worth in safe, predictable units. My mother would say, with eyes that once watered when I pictured a future for myself larger than the kitchen, that I was throwing away what we built. My father would laugh, not cruelly, but with the quiet precision of someone arranging a stack of bills. "You want to be a color on a wall? Fine. But remember where you'll sleep when the rent comes due. Where your name will show up in the ledger of a town that worships tenure like a god." My siblings offered a different kind of jibe, the kind that isn't loud but sticks anyway. They posted my early, awkward canvases on social media with captions like, "Next Picasso, but with less talent and more ramen." It wasn't malice so much as a default setting, the family's way of saying that the dream was laughter-worthy. A carnival ride you take for a season and then return to the bus stop of a real life. I learned to map the months by the weight of the paint can in my hands and the dates of small shows, the number of stools I could sleep on in a borrowed studio, the hours I spent teaching myself to mix pigments that wouldn't photograph well, but could drink light in a way no other medium could. In those years, the world kept insisting I was chasing a ghost, and I kept insisting that the ghost was mine to own. If the dream seemed to exist only on the edge of a wall, that was fine. Edge is where I learned to listen. The first real turning point was not a prize or a grant. It was a wall, an entire street-wide expanse in a nearby city, a derelict tunnel of brick with a chorus of pigeons and rusting rebar. The city offered me a wall, all permission filed and stamped in bureaucratic loveliness. The owner of a small café chain offered a contract to cover the back spaces of his shops with murals. It was not a fortune, but it was momentum. And momentum is a kind of weather you can walk into with your eyes open. I borrowed paint and borrowed courage, and I stood in front of a blank brick that looked at me the way an unsure friend might look at a dare, with skepticism and a stubborn hope both. I painted all through nights when the city's hum turned to a lullaby, and the only sound was the hiss of spray hitting brick. By dawn, color bled into the rough surface. turning the old into a new song. News traveled the way gossip travels in a small town, slow, then sudden. A local gallery owner happened to stroll by after a charity run and found himself staring at the café murals as though he'd discovered a sentence he'd been waiting to read aloud for years. He asked who did them, and when I showed up with paint-streaked hands and a smile that didn't quite know where it belonged, he did something brave. He offered me a show. Not a pity show, not a token project, but a proper space where I could present a coherent body of work. It wasn't a museum, but it felt like a doorway into one. The show opened on a mid-autumn night when the air tasted like rain and old brick. The walls wore my work as if they had always belonged to them. The colors dancing in the glow of soft lamps, the crowd moving as if drawn by gravity towards something honest and unpolished. People who never cared to acknowledge my name now moved close enough to read the notes I'd hidden in the corner of the largest canvas. A line of tiny, almost microscopic figures climbing the edge of a cliff, each one stepping forward with a tremor, but choosing to go on. They didn't know my name, but they felt the tremor in their own chests. A child pressed his finger against a painting of a woman with a bright red scarf and whispered to his mother about courage. A couple stood with their foreheads touching, as if to share a single breath. My family did not come to those first nights. They were busy measuring the distance between pride and guilt, between the dream that refuses to die and the reality that pretends not to notice. I stood before them in a different room now, the room where the family tends to be present only in memory, where the furniture has learned to hold two truths at once, that I am still me, and that I am not asking anyone to apologize for my choices. It was not that they refused to celebrate. It was more that celebration required a new vocabulary, one that could carry the weight of years of quiet erosion. I told them nothing about the show at first, and I did not demand their praise. What I did was stand a little taller. The real turning point was not the gallery's decision to exhibit me. It was the way the show altered the air inside our house when I returned for a family dinner. My mother, who still could not pass a mirror without checking her reflection for the faint miracle of youth, asked if I had found a normal job yet. I told her I had found something truer than normal, a life of color on mended walls, a language that could be spoken without apologizing for its loudness. My father, who had always measured effort by the thickness of a paycheck, looked at the canvases with a new, slow curiosity. He asked if I sold any pieces, if I would consider teaching. It was not the confession of a grand victory, but a pivot of trust. Perhaps the doors I knocked on were not only doors to me, but to them as well. Doors that could finally be opened without fear of breaking something. The family's mockery did not vanish in a single moment. And it did not vanish by magical revelation. It softened like old wood that has soaked in the rain long enough to stop warping. My siblings began to show up at the openings, not to witness my triumph with the exuberance of a cheering audience, but to see what remained of the person they used to mock. They asked for prints, asked if I would teach their children to paint, asked if I would still remember them when I had become the artist. The questions came with a hinge. I could feel it moving between us. A joint that could either creak shut or swing wide to accept a new version of our shared history. What sisters and cousins and aunts offered me, in the end, was a kind of quiet validation that I hadn't expected to demand. It wasn't thunderclap forgiveness. It was the simple acknowledgement that the dream had not destroyed me, that I had not become a caricature of myself for the sake of their laughter. They began to tell their own stories in the margins of my work. A grandmother's favorite color, a cousin's memory of a block party where someone had painted a mural to brighten the night, a father's confession that he had once believed I'd lose more than I ever gained. It was not a moral reversal so much as an unblocking of the air between us. The mockery didn't die. It transformed into a more complicated, more forgiving understanding of risk and vulnerability. In the months that followed, I grew more ambitious, not in the sense of chasing status, but in the sense of demanding more from the world I inhabited. I started taking on commissioned walls that paid better than a starving artist cliché, yes, but more importantly, they forced me to navigate communities that had never before paid much attention to the unruly beauty I offered. I learned to negotiate safety for myself without surrendering the raw honesty that had fed the color in the first place. And slowly, almost without fanfare, I discovered a new family, the gallery staff who believed in the stubborn truth of a painting, the city dwellers who asked me to paint a corner of their memories, the young artists who watched me with the tremor of someone who wants to pick up a spray can and tell the world a version of their truth too. I did not stage a final dramatic confrontation with my parents. There was no war, no declarations, no dramatic severing of ties. Instead, there was a quiet redescription of success that felt like mercy toward myself. I am not who you said I would be, but I am who I chose to become, and I am not asking permission to have it. The dream was not a retreat from the world's expectations. It was a refusal to let the world define me by someone else's measure of worth. And when I finally stood in a room that was mine, where the walls wore my colors and the air tasted of clean rain and new beginnings, I felt for the first time in a long line of mornings that revenge could be nothing more glamorous than staying true to what you know you are. If you ask me whether I would trade the years of doubt and cold dinners for a smooth, predictable path, I'd say no. The price of the dream is the patience to endure the doubt. The reward is not a trophy on a shelf, but a life that continues to teach you how to see, not just with your eyes, but with your nerves, your heartbeat, and the stubborn insistence that your color matters. And so I keep painting. The walls outside keep changing, and I keep changing with them, learning how to stand a little taller each time the world tries to shrink me back into a corner. The family still teases, still learns to bite back the old jokes when the walls around the town suddenly glow with a